course, if I had talent like that, then this would be my opportunity cost, right? I'd be making movies and I'd be giving up being an economics prof, which pays pretty well, but not as well as making hit movies. Okay. Well, I filled up the board this morning. That's kind of one of the markers of I don't know, kind of like on the one hand, on the other hand, and you're an economist if you can do that, and if you can fill up the board with stuff. Notice I haven't labeled anything yet because I want you to do anticipation. As I go from one graph to the next, you might anticipate some of them. And so I started off here with a couple of slides before we finished up next time. We'll talk a little bit more about the water situation. Remember the water situation where where was that? Where was that? Darn it. I was here a couple slides away. Oh, Mr. Wizard. All right, well, it'll pop back up. We talked about how text messaging, sending that around, would have much less effect than having a price signal, a signal wrapped up as an incentive. For some reason, my brain isn't locking onto what slide that's on, but we'll get to that a little later on. A couple of slides before this one was a slide about sawdust. So I thought I'd flesh that out a little bit, right? Rather than reading slides that you can read the equivalent of in the chapter, give you some examples here to work with. And as proof that assumptions are dangerous things, I went to my Top Hat this morning getting ready for class. I said, I fixed up some Top Hat questions already, and that was an assumption. Whoops, no, I'd done that for another class. So no Top Hat questions today, but let's take attendance here. Let's just do that real quick and get that out of the way. And then have some Top Hat stuff next time. Possibly today we'll get to chapter 8. Certainly Tuesday, almost all of Tuesday will be chapter 8, but maybe we'll have some chapter 7 Top Hat questions too. Okay? The exam, as you can see, only covers 5 through 7. And as you might recall from the syllabus, the grade value is going up. Okay, the first test, because it's the first test, even though it covered 4 chapters, only counted for 10% of your grade, and I think this one's counting 16 or 18%, something like that. I know for sure it's a lot more than the first test. However, remember, I did promise that if it benefits your grade, I'll count them all equally. But in case it doesn't benefit your grade, I'll leave it the way it is, specified in the syllabus. But I'll check each one of them line by line as I do grades at the end of the semester. And in case you've got a spam filter that's filtering out my email, and you got your midterm grade and you either gasped because of how cool it was or you gasped because of how bad it was, or just whatever, keep in mind that that's just that grade that I filed as a midterm grade doesn't appear anywhere in any permanent record, and it's based on just exam 1. I didn't try to figure in your homework scores there because you've only done a few, and the way that I grade homework, 1 or more isn't even counted. So it's just based on that 10% of your grade, which means any grade is still possible. If you have an A going in based on a good performance on exam 1, cool, but you could still mess it up. Plenty of time to still mess it up. I'll stick to that term. But the flip side is the more optimistic side. If you had a hiccup there on that first test for whatever reason, there's still plenty of time to make an A. Okay, so either direction, if you're starting just from 10%, there's the other 90% left, some of which is already in your homework, but not very much of it. All right, so finish the attendance here. Back to this. And let's see, should I go to the full? Nah, we'll leave it there. Oh, no, I might as well go to the full slideshow mode. There. All right, let's do this thing on the board, because remember, this chapter is about the price system, and the price system discussion of the price system is about how things are connected. Okay, so let's just see how things are connected. This one is sawdust. Okay, that's the one that the several slides ago mentioned, and it gave you a little link to go there. Marginal revolution can't remember whether it was edu or com, but anyway, it doesn't matter. It's there on one of those slides. You can pop that into your browser, then search under sawdust, and it'll come up with a little blurb by Professor Tabarrok, and there's a link to a Wall Street Journal article from which all of this is derived, so you might wish to read that later on, just to get some text to go with the graphs. All right, so what was going on here with sawdust? Well, the story was that there was an increase in the price of sawdust, and that was producing a bunch of effects, some of which came right from the article, and I thought of a couple more. Okay, so where'd that come from, right? So that's not the beginning of the story here. We had a financial crisis in 2008. Okay, or actually, hold the phone here. That's one of the things us economists doing it with models do, is we say, wait a minute, that's not exactly the way I want to put this. It's not housing generally. Let's focus a little more narrowly, because housing includes reselling of existing houses, and that doesn't require any wood, which doesn't generate any sawdust. But building new homes, especially those ones that they mass produce, they have those big old things made of 2x4s, and they build those in mass, and then they put them up and they nail them together and put sheetrock on them and stick wires in there, and you got a house. Okay, so we had this financial crisis in 2008, and that hurt a lot of people income-wise, so that reduced the demand for housing. Okay, and that's a big deal because a lot of things go into housing, one of which is lumber. Okay, so if they're not building as many homes, they're not going to be demanding as many 2x4s and all the other kinds of wood that they use, but especially 2x4s. And so they're not going to be cutting down as many trees, and so they're not going to be paying as many lumberjacks, and so there's not going to be as much income in a bunch of communities, especially in the Pacific Northwest. Ripple, and all the markets are connected. Nobody's giving any commands, nothing. Everything happens, all the adjustments occur by freedom reacting to prices. Okay? Freedom is the operative word here. People are making decisions among their alternatives. The consumers are looking for better buys. The sellers are looking for higher profits, or in this case, in some cases, lower losses. Okay? So as a result of the housing crash that happened because of the government pressuring banks to lend to people that couldn't pay back their loans or had high probability of defaulting on their loans, well, that finally came due. That housing bubble burst. That reduced the demand for lumber. That reduced the supply of sawdust. What's the connection between these two? Production complements. Now, you can't produce lumber for making houses without doing a bunch of slicing and dicing, and that produces as a byproduct sawdust. The key word there is byproduct. Okay? Production complements. Byproducts. Joint products. Things made at the same time. One is made with the other automatically. Nobody has to decide to do it. How much sawdust should we make? I guess there's some decision there. If sawdust was more valuable, they might use fatter saws. Would they do that? I don't know. Yeah, but at the margin, there are always adjustments to be made driven by price. Okay, so a reduced supply of sawdust, and that's where the story begins in that article. Okay, so this higher price runs into some other markets. Let's see, what would this one be? Yeah, this one was, I'm trying to remember from reading the article. Okay, one of the results of less sawdust is a reduced supply of particle board. Okay, so what about the next one? See, now we're ready to do some hint, right? There's a hint there. There's two demand lines, right? So something, either demand increased or decreased. What do you think? Right, as a result of the increase in the price of particle board. Okay, one way to answer this question is, picture yourself going into Home Depot and you're thinking, okay, I want to buy some particle board to do whatever. You go in there and you go, oh, wow, prices of particle board have really gone up. Wow. So you what? You do consider alternatives, right? Like, hello? Like, there isn't going to be a giant hook come from the ceiling if you're wrong and jerk you off the stage. It's okay. What's a consumption substitute for particle board? Probably sitting right next to it at Home Depot. Plywood. There you go. Okay, so this would be now, there's probably some other things going on here with plywood. Probably they're involved in home construction in some ways too. So there's probably some countervailing effects here. But just as a result of the effect of the particle board market, there's going to be an increased demand for plywood. And again, the key here is all of this happens, all of these adjustments in quantity, which I didn't put up here, but you can add them. All the adjustments in quantity occur with a bureaucracy of 0 people, right? No bureaucracy, no commanding, no text messaging of, hey, you plywood producers better step it up, okay? Or you particle board producers better cut it back. None of that. Just it happens automatically by people pursuing their best option, either as buyers or sellers. By the way, this is one of the reasons that I decided to spend the time on this today, is because most of you in here now are business majors. These are the kinds of things that you better be doing, at least on the back of an envelope, every once in a while as part of a business, to anticipate, right, effects down there reaching you at the other end. Okay, through several connections, that if you're ready at the other end, anticipating the effect of the thing at the beginning, you make more money, right, in the business that you're involved in. If you don't, you might not just make less money, but not be ready for something and be toast, have over-invested in your business, for example, and not be able to cover that. All right, so we got another arrow from sawdust. Let's see, this one was cows, according to the article. I never had any idea, but according to the article, milk cows like to lie in a bed of sawdust. Okay, they prefer that over other places to park their bodies. And it turns out the more time they spend horizontal rather than walking around, the more milk they produce. So if they're more comfortable, they're more likely to lie down more often and produce more milk. Okay, so if they don't like the bedding, because there's not as much sawdust, because it's more expensive, then there's going to be a reduced supply of milk. And an increase in the price of milk, and if I had more blackboard space and more time, I could draw some arrows from that, and all the things that would affect. Cereal, right, milk and cereal, okay, consumption complements, that would be affected. Okay, things you used instead of milk. We've switched from milk to almond milk, right? So the almond milk producers would be affected by an increase in the demand for almond milk. Let's see, in the next one, see, a lot of you are thinking, oh, wow, where'd that come from? I'd have never thunk it. Okay, see, I can talk slang as well as Cajun. I'd have never thunk it. Okay. See, a lot of the wineries like to use some kinds of sawdust in the production of wine. And it even affects the flavor of the wine, which is why I decided to put a little bit of a demand shift in there too. Say the direct effect of the sawdust is to reduce the supply by increasing the cost of producing the wine. But if the wine producers have a difficult time finding sawdust at any price, which is the case in some of the stories in the article, or have to pay a lot for it, either way, supply is going to be reduced, they're going to switch to substitutes, will affect the taste of their wine. See? Because their customers are used to the flavor of their wine, and it might be affected a little bit by switching to some other alternative. Okay, of course, they're not going to switch to something that drastically affects the flavor, but even if it affects it just a little bit, some will say, that's not the wine I'm used to, and they'll buy something else. Right? This affects the beer market, right? Because beer is a consumption substitute for wine, which arrows all over the place. Right? Get yourself a piece of 11 by 17 paper and Put the sawdust one in the middle and go for it. That's how you're going to really learn stuff rather than just reading words, eyes going over paper. Draw some graphs and say, what if? Have some fun with it. What if, another war in the Middle East or something? That's certainly not unlikely. Well, actually, over in the Middle East, it's not a case of another war. It's just an intensification or de-intensification of the one that's constantly going on over there. Somebody's usually fighting with or shooting at somebody over there. Okay, let's see. What was my last one? Can't go without that one given our textbook, right? See, they use sawdust to fill pockets that they drill through. Apparently it's not good to drill through just air. So I'm not sure why that is, but that's what it says. So when they encounter a cavern-like opening and they're drilling, apparently they feel that it's helpful to fill it with something, and sawdust works as well as anything else, and so the higher cost for sawdust reduces the supply of oil. Not very much, okay? Exaggeration, but a little bit. All right, see, these are the kinds of things that you need to be ready and confident to do as a result of taking a course like this, okay, as part of running a business someday, part of helping to run a business. Right? Maybe you're not going to be the owner, but you'll be the employee, and you'll say, boss, you better be ready for such and such, because I just read, about the thing over here at this end, and in a little while, that's going to ripple through. See, that's what I have this slide up for, ripple effects. See, and this slide talks about stuff that's going on all the time. See, and that's going to be the noise now for a lot of these markets. They're going to be these big shifts because of the sawdust thing, or well, up to here, the sawdust is the effect, not the cause. But then those will go through here, and that'll be the big effect, and this will be just in the background, the change in population and income steadily increasing the demand. That'll be in the background, but most of the time it's the other way around. Things are quiet, sort of quiet, and the demand is increasing as a population and income, and then these other shifters are the noise that keep life interesting alongside that steady conveyor belt-like change. Questions, comments, thoughts, discussion, clarification, paraphrasing back what you heard and to see if you got it or not. That's a very good learning technique. Doc, here's what I think I heard you say. And then I say, oh, no, that isn't what I meant for you to hear me say. Here's what I meant for you to hear me say, and I get to restate it. Feedback is good. All right, so you've seen that slide already. Okay, so in the context of this slide here, the noise is this stuff, all the stuff going around that affects concrete other than population and income. And then the ripple effects are the fact that changes in the concrete market or up on the board in the sawdust market affect tons of other things that affect tons of other things that quietly work their way through the economy without any command or anything. Freedom in action. Remember that when you hear about capitalism and people denigrating it, it's just freedom. It's people pursuing bargains on the buying side and producing profit on the other side. That's the part that people don't like, is trying to make a profit. But profit is, you think the people working at a nonprofit are working for free? No. So a profit is just an uncertain income for somebody is all it is. Somebody's taking a chance of not making any money at all. And if they do a good job, they may make a lot of money. Okay, whereas if you're the director of a nonprofit, you have a salary, right? So your income is pretty certain. Now it may run out because whoever the philanthropist, whoever's underwriting it may run out of money or run out of the desire to finance it. There's risk everywhere. All right, moving right along. I don't know how I clicked by this. Okay, this is the thing for water. Just discuss this a little bit, because especially the next chapter. Chapter 8 is going to be about price floors and price ceilings, government interference with this marvel of a mechanism, the price system. Politics is what it is. People demand things, and if there's enough yelling and screaming, the politicians say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. I respond to votes, and I'm on it. And yeah, those prices are awfully high. Let's do something about that. And yeah, let's pass a law that restricting rents or insurance premiums or something. Things we've talked about the consequences. Let's just talk about the water here in San Antonio for just a few minutes to get a handle on the price system's power. Because the price system, whether it's working or not, is powerful. Price signals are powerful. If they're distorted, they cause mass damage. They cause inefficiency. If they're signaling correctly exactly what the opportunity costs are and what the values are, then things go pretty well. And luckily, that's the case in most markets most of the time. But here in San Antonio, the price of water to your home is way below the marginal cost of water into the system. Right? And the reason for that, it's a political decision that says, well, we've got a lot of cheap water we're getting out of the ground, the Edwards Aquifer. Right? That's just the cost of pumping it out of the ground, pretty cheap. But that's not enough to meet the demand for water in a growing city anymore. So we need some additional water sources. Oh, whoops, they're way, way, way more expensive to get water from those sources than to get it just out of the ground from the Edwards Aquifer. So a political decision is, should we blend the expensive water with the cheap water and sell it at the average price? Right? The books balance. They're not losing money. They're paying the bills of getting the water to your home. Right? They're not subsidized from someplace else, from taxes or something. San Antonio water system pays their expenses out of what they charge you on their water bill. So, where's the problem, you say? Well, because by not charging you the cost at the margin, not signaling what it costs to put water into the system so you can take it out at the margin, you're getting this signal, oh, water's still pretty cheap. So you build a swimming pool if you have the income to do it. Or you have lush landscaping. Or you leave the hose running while you're washing your car instead of putting a little nozzle on it, with a little spray thing on it. Right? Because you don't see that much of an effect on your water bill. And so what's the effect on the other end? There's a lot higher quantity demanded for water at that artificially low average pricing cost that they bill you. And so we've got to find a lot more water sources than we otherwise would have. We have to build a lot more dams than we otherwise would have to build. And of course, that's for those of you that consider yourself environmentalists, and I consider myself a radical right-wing environmentalist. Process that a little bit. Just wait a minute, what's a radical? Anyway, just think about that. That's part of the statement there. But for those of you who think you're environmentalists, think about what that means, building a lot more dams. Because water is priced in a way that makes it seem cheaper than it really is. See, when you turn the tap, you're pushing at the limit of the system, right? You're causing them to go to those additional water sources to make up for the fact that we don't have enough from just the Edwards Aquifer. Okay? So you're causing that cost of that very expensive water that they pipe from some distant place, or that's brackish and they have to treat it, and that makes it expensive. So if you were signaled that cost, you wouldn't buy as much water, right? And they wouldn't have to go to use as many of those sources. And they wouldn't have to build as many dams or as many pipelines or any of that stuff that they have to do. So it'd be less environmental carnage. Do you know that most rivers in Texas are severely depleted by the time they reach the coast? Because there's a lot of dams on them, and the water gets trapped behind the dams and gets sent off someplace. What does that mean? Well, that has a pretty big environmental effect on those coastal swampy areas and all the neat stuff that grows there. Those are in terms of biodiversity, those are the really rich places in the world, is the coastal estuaries, they're called, where the salt water and the fresh water mix. Okay, so poor signaling has consequences. See, and so you're saying, well, why don't they charge that price that it costs to put water in the system so that quantity demanded equals quantity supplied? Because it would mean a very, very huge increase in water rates. No, they don't want to do that. They can mix the cheap water with the expensive water, and the water rates are still going up big time because of that expensive water going in there, but they're not going up as much. But for that, they sacrifice that signal to you of how expensive water really is, which means that you use a lot more water than you otherwise would. And plus, we want to attract, seems bizarre to me and a lot of other people that think about it, we want to attract more businesses to San Antonio, including those that use a lot of water, that's the part that seems kind of weird to me. Don't we want to signal to the businesses out there that this is a place where water is no longer all that abundant, and maybe go for businesses that are given that signal that don't use water quite as liberally as others. Oh well. The question a lot of people ask, why do they do that? It doesn't make any sense. Well, I know it sounds a little cynical, but that's just the nature of politics. It's not about making sense. Sorry. It's about winning votes of people who are only barely paying attention. That's the nature of it. I mean, for president, come on, how many people vote even, bother to vote? Less than half the people who are eligible to. What do you think, how many people do you think are paying attention when it comes to vote for senator or representative or city council or county commissioner or any of those other offices? Can you name any of those people that are representing you and taxing you and creating laws that you have to obey? No, because you're busy, you have a life, you have to make money, you have to study for classes. You don't have time to study that many political candidates. See, that's why some of us think political accountability is mostly just your vivid imagination. Because those politicians know that the vast majority of things that they do are unseen to the vast majority. So to whom are they seen? The special interests. See, now you know why they're powerful. They're the only ones paying attention. And which things are they paying attention to? Where their interest, that's my wallet I'm hitting, right? That's where that interest is covered. We've committeeized politics. I just invented a new word, right? Committeeized. What does that mean? That means the teachers pay attention to school board elections, but not anything else, because they have limited time. Okay, so that's the one they focus on, because that's where their income comes from. It means the engineers follow the river board elections. Bet you didn't even know there was such a thing as a river board election. Yeah, you, those river board people are accountable to you, supposedly, because they're elected. Voter turnout about 3%. Just the engineers, pretty much. All right, anyway, I've gone off on a tangent a little bit, but that's part of an intro to chapter 8, where we get to talk about price floors and ceilings. The government, through the political process, government is politics. That's all it is. By design. I mean, it's designed to be accountable through the political process. It's not a bad thing, a good thing. It just is. It's what it is. Changing the people helps some, but mostly it's the process. Speaking of process, the process that collapsed officially about 25 years ago, right? Soviet Union and Eastern European central planning collapsed because, among other things, they didn't let firms go bankrupt. They didn't use that signaling process called the price system that said, hey, your resources are worth more in other uses than the product you're selling. That's what bankruptcy means. The resources you're using are worth more doing other things than in what your firm is producing. It's a brutal process, isn't it? It's so impersonal, too. It says, hey, you can't pay your bills, sorry. Right? But what it means is it's time for those resources to be doing something else. It's time for them to go to their next best alternative, which, since you can't pay your bills, is a better alternative for the economy than what you're doing in your business. As business majors, you are going to be tasked and educated to figure out how to avoid that outcome, right? By doing a good job of making your product and selling it and all that so that you can pay your bills. Okay, so the Soviet Union collapsed because, as Margaret Thatcher, a British prime minister a few decades ago, once said, you eventually run out of other people's money. Right? When you socialize things, the quantity demanded goes up because everything is priced at near zero. Okay, or at least it's not priced according to market systems. And people want an awful lot when it's free. So then somebody else has got to pay, right? It isn't actually, no, there's no such thing as free. 100% of the people pay 100% of the expenses. So if you're not paying, somebody else is. Okay, so that's when things get really expensive. Okay, let's move on to some other stuff that's officially in the chapter. All that stuff's in there. It's just not in there in those words. The water stuff was jumped a little bit ahead to the next chapter. Okay, what's another aspect of the price system? Well, in Cajun, anticipation or speculation. Right? If you think that the price of something is going to be higher, say in the future, you might be tempted to buy some of it now, or at least the right to buy it, those future contracts that's discussed in your book. Okay, buy it or the right to buy it, put it in storage, and sell it later. This is a good thing, although speculators are widely derided. Why are they widely derided? Because they drive up current prices. Oh, those evil speculators. That's why oil is so expensive, is they're out there speculating that it'll be more expensive later on. And so they're pulling it from the market now, which raises prices, putting it in a storage container someplace, or just not sucking it out of the ground yet. Waiting, anticipation, right, of the price actually going up and saying, oh, now think about that a little bit. Isn't that a good thing? If they didn't have that oil in storage for later on, if they're right, what if they're wrong? Bankruptcy. That doesn't end in T-I-O-N. Anyway, bankruptcy, right? If they guess wrong and they buy up all this oil and they put it in storage and later on the price is lower, whoops, they just lost a lot of money and they're going to sell it at a lower price rather than they could have sold it at a higher one. Oh well. See, that's why speculation is a dangerous, risky business. But if they're right, what they do is they take oil or whatever they're speculating in from a time of relatively low value use, taking it out of that a little bit, moving it to the future when it'll be worth more, causing the price to not go up as much as it otherwise would have in the future. Thank a speculator the next time something goes up in price, because it probably would have gone up even more had it not been for them speculating, buying something when it was cheap to sell it later when it was more expensive. Okay, and yeah, indeed, they're not always correct. The government tried to do this a few years ago, and they're still sort of in the business of the after effect of that now. Back in the 1930s, there was a lot of discussion of how volatile farm prices are. So the government got into the speculation business by saying, okay, here's what we think the price fluctuation range is going to be in the future, and we're going to set a price floor here to buy it when it's cheap, so it doesn't go down as much as it otherwise would have. And then later, when the price goes up, then we'll sell off, we, the taxpayers, will sell off what we purchased when the price was low, they thought. Okay, and then that'll do like what says up here on the slide, the speculation moves things from a period of lower prices to higher prices, thus moderating the fluctuation in prices. What went wrong? Why didn't that work out? Why didn't the difference between them, that being us, taxpayers, buying it cheap, and then later selling it when it's more expensive, why didn't that pay the cost of doing all of that moving of crop around and stuff? We made it less risky to produce the crop. See, the difference between speculators out there in the real world is we don't know what they're going to do. Right? They're free to do whatever they want. They're part of the free enterprise system. But when the government announces in advance that here's what price we'll buy corn at, wheat, cotton, whatever, to make sure the price doesn't go any lower than that, then the farmer says, "Whoa, wow, I'm guaranteed at least that price if I produce that crop. It's not going to go any lower than that. Maybe I better plant a little bit more of that and a little less of these other uncertain crops for which I have no idea really within limits what the price is going to be 4 or 5 months from now when I harvest my crop." So what happened? The supply of the crop increased that had that guaranteed minimum price. And so the price never hit or hardly ever hit the high price. The government was buying crop all the time, most years, and the price at which they said they would sell it off at never got to that anymore. So there were crop surpluses the government had to buy, we had to buy, us taxpayers. And then so it just kept piling, because every year there'd be this surplus to buy. And hardly ever any years when the price would be hit when they would sell off any of it. Oops. There's a big difference between speculating through free enterprise and speculating formally through a law and a government program. It did have its effect of, the price didn't go lower than that official amount anymore, but it costs billions of dollars every year too. See, I bet you never heard of that program. See, did you ever punish a politician for voting for that program? No, had no idea, right? See, that's what I mean about political accountability, is sort of like your vivid imagination mostly. Again, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything bad. You have a life. You have minimal time to do an awful lot of things, and one of those low priority things for most people is to figure out all the things that the government is doing at any given moment, which is an awful lot. just doesn't rise to the top of the agenda very often, right? If you have other things that you spend your scarce time on. All right, so speculators may not always be correct, and in some cases, if it becomes formal speculation, they may be wrong most of the time. But then if it's the government, it doesn't have its own money, it just has ours. So that can be sustained long-term by taxpayers not knowing what's going on or having other priorities that trump those. Here's a graph right straight out of the book, so it's nothing but fishing for questions. Here's what we just discussed, okay, but written in a model form. Okay, so you might try to do that more often as you try to figure out a way for your study time, which I know is scarce. See, when I have a student up in my office sometime and he or she doesn't do so well and they're wondering why, and I say, well, what are you going to do about it? Oh, I'm going to study harder. Okay, great, if you manage to do that. But, the last time I checked, the day isn't getting any longer. Okay, and most of you are awfully busy. You're probably not going to find much additional time to study. So what are you going to do? Are you going to figure out a way to study better? See, that's the thing you need to do. So, okay, so this thing is right there in your book, and we just talked about it. Do you get it? If you don't, then here we are in a nice discussion forum. We can talk about it. Here's the other graph. See, this is what we just said in words. I didn't draw it on the board because I had this slide coming up. Okay, so the left-hand graph is, okay, let's buy it when it's cheap, put it in storage. That costs the economy, that blue shaded area in the left-hand graph, a loss in value. If they're correct later on, sell it at what the price would be otherwise higher, and it still is somewhat higher. They sell it off, and the gain to the economy is more than the loss from having driven up the price previously. So again, thank a speculator. And what speculator do a lot of us see pretty often, especially as 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds? You all love music, right? And so what speculator do you encounter occasionally? Or maybe you are that person, a speculator in what? Ponder what you've purchased that you've resold, or what you've purchased that somebody else purchased for you. Don't go to concerts much? You don't think about going to concerts? Let's say there's your favorite musician coming to town. You want to go to the concert, right? Concerts, especially for the really popular musicians, are habitually underpriced. And that's kind of a long story. They don't want to make you mad and cost themselves record sales. So that they often do not charge the price that would just barely fill the venue. They often charge a lower price. So that means what? A shortage, right? That means if you're too busy to stand in line a long time, or if you're not too busy to stand in line a long time, see, two different ends of the story. First, if you're too busy to stand in line a long time, what do? You buy from a scalper. Right? Some of the people in the front of the line, spending their time doing that, they understand that fact. They understand that there are people who don't have the time to stand in line a long time, or just they won't. And so they buy a ton of tickets up there in front of the line, and they know they're going to sell off some or all of those. Why? Because the tickets are worth a lot more to someone else than... See, sometimes people don't know they're going to be scalpers when they buy the tickets, but then when they pop open Craigslist or what's the other one? Brain burp. eBay. They pop that open and say, whoa, the tickets are going for, $1,000 or something. I paid $100 for it. And see, now you're faced with an opportunity cost. If I go to the concert, I'm giving up $1,000, right? Because there it is, a button to push. You could sell for it. No, I don't want to go to the concert that bad. So you sell your ticket, right? You didn't know you were going to be a scalper when you bought them. Suddenly, you were induced to be, suddenly you turned, I was a speculator. Oh, I invested 2 hours standing in line. That had a pretty good market return, right? I spent $100, sold it for $1,000. Good. Yeah, they had that. See, where was that in your? Anyway, recently the Pope was in New York. They were giving tickets. They had more demand than they had space on the streets, for where he was going to be driving. So they gave away the tickets. Guess what? They popped up on eBay and Craigslist the next day. People with the tickets were selling them. right? Because they knew the demand was more than the supply. And so when that's the case, the price should be above zero, right? To allocate them out. And they understood that and they sold them, which for some reason upset the people that gave them away. I guess it upset them because they, oops, we should have sold them ourselves, right? Rather than giving them away. All right, so there's that. No questions today. I'm a little worried. It's just spellbinding oratory, right? And you're just waiting for more. Okay, you don't want to. There's an opportunity cost. If you talk, I won't be. And today, that's costly. Sorry, I don't believe that myself. But I mean, especially given the attendance rate, it can't be that awesome. So, I appreciate you attending, though. All right, so here's something that I understood better by making this example that's up here. It'll be up here in a second. There it is. But we'll leave it off there for the moment. See, another way to speculate without actually having to lay your hands on a product and put it someplace in storage is called a future contract or a forward contract. There's a little bit of fine print, a little footnote there in your book that you might want to read that gets into some of those details if they interest you. And frankly, again, since most of you are business majors or business majors to be in here, it should interest you, right? Because it's something that will affect your ability to do things. So one way to speculate is to buy or sell a contract to do something in the future. It's kind of like insurance. I mean, it's pretty much exactly what it is. Right? If you wanted to guarantee that you could buy something at today's price, but a year from now at that price, you could arrange such a deal. And since today's price is everybody's kind of best average guess as to what the future price is going to be, right? Because of speculation, right? If they thought it was going to be a lot different, they'd buy it up now to sell it later. Okay, so the thinking is that today's price is a pretty good predictor of future prices, and you're not sure. You want to lock in the current price, so you buy a future contract. Okay, and again, since today's price is a pretty good predictor of prices later, that contract won't cost you much. What if you wanted to buy a future contract to buy it for less than the current price? That would be pretty expensive, right? Because somebody would have to make good on the price difference if the price is still what it is now. Yeah, but anyway, these are ways to lock in at a cost future prices, either as a buyer or a seller. Okay, now, so you absorb that. Okay, all right. See, and I even read that. I don't deal in these things very often. I first read that and I was like, well, what is a future contract? Really? I mean, I hadn't thought about a future contract until this chapter came up in your book forever. You know, I do school system stuff and environmental stuff, which you can gather from some of my examples. Okay, so I said, I better figure out this stuff a little better, so I'll come up with an example. And as a result of the example, now I understand it better, which is maybe a hint for you when you study. You better think of a concrete example to get it to find a comfortable place in your brain, or you won't be able to pull it out within a minute or two under test pressure a week from today. Right? Rather than just running eyes over words on a page and expecting that to register in your brain, which is distracted by a bunch of other things at any given moment. Not going to work. Okay, so like I said, if you wanted to buy something, wanted to be sure you could buy something a year from now at today's price, that ought to be pretty cheap, right? To get somebody to say, yeah, I'll promise to do that. Oh, Billy, yes. I'm sorry, what? I'll get to that. You're just reading a little bit of ahead there, so that's cool. But yeah, I'm going to get to that. So it ought to be pretty cheap, right? So just for some numbers, there they are. So right now, what you want to buy a year from now is 100 of something. And right now the price is $25. And so a year from now, let's suppose the price is still $25. The person who did that deal with you doesn't have to do anything, right? Because you can go right out and buy it for $25. So whatever you spend on the contract, you spend it for nothing, right? I mean, sort of for nothing. You got rid of some risk. And the thing you were worried about didn't happen. So you didn't have that risk to worry about. You slept better. But the contract didn't actually allow you to do or not do anything. You were able to do it anyway on your own. But now, Billy's question. What if the price a year later is higher than 25? The thing you were worried about happening did happen. Okay, so what does the person do that promised the good to you at $25? They've got to go out and buy it at the current price. Right? Remember, a future contract, they're not putting anything in storage. they've got to go out and buy it at the current price, the $30, and sell it to you for $25. Okay, so how much is 30 times 100? 3,000. Okay, so how much is 25 times 100? 25 times 100 is 2,500. Okay, so there's your $500. Okay, so no products actually change hands. Somebody sends somebody a check for $500 and said, okay, now you can go out and spend $2,500 of your own money and $500 of mine to buy these 100 units of stuff that you wanted to buy. Okay, so that's what a future contract does. Yes? Yeah, to make good on that deal, the person who entered into that contract, who said, yeah, I'll promise you to have 100 units of this stuff at $25 each a year from now. A year from now happens, now the price is 30, and you say, you sold me this contract, I want to pay $25 each for 100 of these, and you say, okay, here's your 100 of them, here, pay me the $2,500, okay, but you can't get the 100 of it for $2,500, you have to pay $3,000 to buy it, to give it to them, to sell it to them for $2,500. So you're out $500. Now, if you sold the contract for more than $500, you're thinking, cool, I did okay. But if you sold the contract for $100, you're saying, I'm out $400. So it depends on the cost of the contract, right? It's not a freebie, it's like an insurance policy. You have to pay for that agreement, right? Because you're transferring the risk of price change to someone else. They're accepting that risk for a payment. And in this case, just like a tree falling on your house, you register a claim with the insurance company and they send you a check. Cool. More. See, looking at this example, see, they didn't get it at first. Hopefully they do now, and they give me the thumbs up, so I'll go with that. Same thing for you. If you don't get it from the written word, discussion is in order. Okay, now, as the last line there says, if you want to get a contract for something very unlikely, think of it like buying earthquake insurance in California. There's going to be an earthquake there, right? It's only when and how big and exactly where. Okay, so earthquake insurance in California is very expensive. Okay, a contract for something very unlikely, okay, will be very expensive. So in other words, for example, if the price now is $25 and you wanted to get a future contract to buy the thing for $20 a year from now, somebody might do that for a high payment, perhaps in anticipation they've got some information that they think, yeah, the price is going to go lower next year. And oh yeah, somebody wants to buy that, and I'll take my chances for that big amount that my thought that the price is going to be lower next year will actually happen. Nobody but me believes that it will be $20 next year or lower. I think it will be. I'm not sure. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Oh, they're offering, $1,000 for, okay, that's it. I'll take that chance for that price. Insurance, futures, it's legalized gambling. Okay? We need some legalized gambling, right? There'd be a lot of problems in our economy if you couldn't buy insurance, this kind included. Right? But that's you're betting. There are odds. You're betting for or against that. Odds being a little higher or lower for a particular thing than somebody else believes that they will be. Okay, so again, the slides are a little bit behind the discussion. Futures provide a way to speculate without having to actually hold the good. Right? The example we just had, nobody went out and bought the stuff. They didn't buy 100 units of the stuff and set it aside someplace for $25 and then a year from now provide it. They just made up the difference in the price if there was a difference to make up. As your book says, they do cash settlement in the vast majority of cases rather than actually going someplace, buying the product for whatever the going rate is and then selling it for what the contract rate is to that person. Cushing, Oklahoma was the site in the book's examples. Okay, so this, again, borrow the slide from the authors. They're also used for reducing risk. They're pretty much used for reducing risk. I'm not sure what else you would use them for other than reducing risk because you can always wait a year and then buy the product or sell the product at whatever the price is at that time. If you're afraid of whatever that price might be, then you buy a future contract. Okay, and you transfer that risk to somebody else. This is another thing that I wasn't aware of till a few years ago, because we economists are highly compartmentalized and we do different things, and this didn't come up on my radar screen until getting into some of this stuff. You want to figure out whether something's likely to happen. It doesn't almost anything. Somebody being elected to president, somebody winning the World Series. You want to get the best estimate of it, you go to where people are putting their money, where their mouth is. It's called a prediction market. People buy shares in likely outcomes. And see, when people's money is at stake, and with the price system, it harnesses a lot of information. Okay? So the information underlying the predictions in these markets, what's the most likely, winner of the World Series or the winner of the next presidential election? I should check that on how that's currently standing, who's the most likely president a year and a half from now. Because I'm sure there's something there. But see, all the shares are the probabilities right now with, still at least 10 Republican candidates and 3 or 4 on the Democrat side. All the shares are cheap, and you can make a lot of money if you are a good predictor. But even so, whoever's share value is highest is probably the best bet right now to be the next president. It'll get better as some drop out and the share values will go up. Let me explain what I mean by share value. If you spend $10 on candidate X, well, let me put it a different way. Let's say that candidate X has a 10% chance of winning. Well, that means a $10 return if he wins, she wins, to Carly Fiorina and Hillary Clinton, 2 females. A $10 return will require a $1 bet per se, right? If they have a 10% chance of winning, that's what that'll cost you. Okay, so if you bet early, when there's lots of candidates and each probability is low, you can make a lot of money, but also you have a very low probability of winning. And I think the book talks about Barack Obama having had like a 70% percentage rate of the likelihood of winning. I can't remember what it was, 2008 or 2012, and that was way above anybody else's share, but still, it was a risk. He might not win. Okay, so if you spent $750, 75% chance of winning, and he did win, you'd get $10. Okay, but if he didn't win, of course, there goes your $750. And if it was 2012, that was Mitt Romney. You spent the $250 on him, right, 25% chance of winning, and he won. Well, you'd make the difference between $10 and your $250, but because you had a lower probability of happening, according to the people involved in that market. And I don't understand this other one as well, the Hollywood Stock Exchange, because it's not for real money, but still it seems to work pretty well in predicting how movies will do, because that's what people are betting on there, is how popular a movie will be and how much money it'll make. So even when it's for fun, prices seem to harness an awful lot and reflect an awful lot of information. Okay, as you probably know, a variety of people, Bill O'Reilly among others, derides speculation for the effect on current prices. Not coming later and saying, boy, lucky those speculators went there and bought up a bunch of stuff last year at low prices, and now they're selling it this year at high prices, and wow, the price would be even higher now other than them. That usually doesn't hit the press. Okay, so speculation moderates price fluctuation. That's what it does. And as a couple graphs ago showed, that's beneficial to the economy because we move things from periods of low value to periods of higher value. Here's an example where a huge firm was allowed to go bankrupt by our government. Others that were in similar circumstances were bailed out. But this one was one that was looking bad for quite a while, and sure enough, the speculators had it right in this case. They were thinking it was going to go lower. And see, then the critics of the speculators said, well, we went lower because of them. Well, there is a challenge sometimes in disentangling cause and effect. Okay, so that was the point up here. What the slide says, markets are interconnected. so that a change in the supply or demand in one market can influence others often thousands of miles away. Like the flower market in Kenya can affect the flower markets in North America, or the flower market in Holland. Remember Holland, Netherlands, famous for tulips? Okay, well, tulips and roses are consumption substitutes. So something going on down there in Kenya will register as an effect in the tulip markets in Holland. An alternative to the seeming chaos of price systems at work and the ripple effects going back and forth across the world constantly is, let's just put the experts in charge. Let's have them gather information. They're experts after all, and they know what that information means. And have them decide, what are we going to produce? How are we going to produce it? Where is it going to be produced? Who's going to end up with it? Right? The key economic questions that all isms must answer. Isms, socialism, capitalism, they all end in ism, different ways of constructing economic activity. And so now let's just have the experts do that. No, it's always turned out to be a disaster. Freedom through seeming chaos, decentralized planning, which some people call no planning, but it's really decentralized planning through the price system, work a lot better with the bureaucracy of zero than the old Soviet Union and other centrally planned economies ever did or ever have worked. And the important thing to understand is we're no better at central planning than anybody else. That when we try to centrally plan things like education systems and transportation systems, which we do, right? Those are government functions. They're not driven by the market price system other than, there's some external data coming into those things, like the transportation system has to take account of the price of concrete, among other things, for building highways. But for the most part, those are centrally planned things. And guess what? Those two areas in the United States, relatively speaking, are a disaster. Right? A highway system, let's talk about that for just a few minutes. Constant shortages, right? Growing bigger every year on freeways. What's the problem with a freeway at, say, about the time you were headed to UTSA this morning? Is the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied at a price of zero? Well, a price of zero above the cost of operating a vehicle, which isn't trivial, but actually being on the road at that time, getting in other people's way, making their trip slower, right? There's no penalty for that other than you're slowing yourself down too by going shopping then. See, there are people on the highway, believe it or not, whose opportunity costs are low enough that even though they could go at another time, they go shopping or visiting friends or whatever during rush hour. Now, what do you suppose Eco 101, 2023, says about that? Let's see. A shortage. Oh, I remember that from Eco 2023. That means the price is too low. Oh, see, I'm in a traffic jam. Isn't that a shortage of highway space? Yes. So what does that say to do? There should be tolls charged. Luckily, you didn't come armed today. Why do I say that? The Texas legislature has ruled 150 to 0. Do you know anything else that they agree upon, 150 to 0? That's one. Can't charge tolls on existing roads that are already paid for. Yeah, you can have a separate set of roads where you pay a toll as an alternative to, which is one of the looniest things that the political process, which is saying something, has ever come up with. Because the only way anybody will ever be on the, if you've ever been to Houston, on the Katy freeway, the leftmost lanes, there's nobody in there during most of the day, right? Because most of the day, the traffic is moving okay in the free lanes. The only way anybody is going to be in the special lanes where you have to pay a toll is if the vast majority are stuck in traffic. If that's the alternative, is to be stuck in traffic. Anyway, so there's a shortage. The price was higher, right? The people that don't have to be on the road then because they're going to class or they're going to work that starts at a specific time. They're just going shopping or to see a friend or, to enjoy the river walk or something. They say, and now that the opportunity cost includes paying this toll, I think I'll go later after the rush hour period ends. And then everybody else, minus those 10 or 15% of the drivers, that's about how many they are, minus them, everybody else is now able to drive at the speed limit. See the economics, the graphs work again. A shortage, the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down, and you say, how does the quantity supplied go up, as these graphs say that they should? Right? A shortage, price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. Well, how does the quantity supplied go up? Well, not immediately, right? A highway is kind of a fixed asset. It takes a while to build more lanes. But hey, where do you think the toll monies go, or should go? They don't always go, but they should, to building additional lanes. See, so the people who are the cause of the rush hour finance their own additional capacity. And thus, see, the lanes that you only need during rush hour should be paid only by rush hour, should be paid for by the rush hour travelers. Anyway, so just another lesson in the kind of the weirdness, I think, of the political process. They've outlawed something that Eco 101 or 2023 says that you should do, which is charge a price during a shortage. Okay, so there shouldn't be a toll on the road all the time. There shouldn't be a toll road. Eco 2023 says that there should be tolls when there would otherwise be a shortage. And then to build additional lanes so that more people can travel during those times without being slowed down by others. Okay? Free markets accomplish all of these things through freedom. That's why they're called free markets. So in the toll example, what would that mean? That means that if you choose to pay the toll, you get where you're going faster than you otherwise would. You can also choose not to travel at that time and save having to pay the toll and go at a different time. In the case of the rush hour tolls, there's so many choices. Let's suppose they had something like that. You could do what? Take the bus, go at a different time, carpool, or just change your schedule. Like, for example, one of the nice things of this job is quite a bit of flexibility. So say I-10 has got a rush hour toll that goes from, say, 4 to 6 or 6:30 or something like that. And after 6:30 it expires. Then I say, I could eat dinner over here by either in my office or up at the cafeteria, and then go home a little later, miss paying the toll. Okay, or go over to Olive Garden, right, before getting on the highway. See, there's a lot of different ways that I can adjust to that toll, or you could adjust to it. Or you'd pay it and then you'd get something for your money. You'd get where you're going without the traffic jam. Okay? So the price system is awesome. It allows for things to get done through freedom, people evaluating their options and adjusting to them, or getting something for their money if they continue to do whatever they were already doing. Okay, so again, I jumped the gun on a slide. Free markets provide powerful signals, and as my water example illustrated earlier, the signals are powerful whether they're right or whether they're wrong. They're powerful whether the signals are communicating scarcely correctly or not. For example, the minimum wage, okay, which, by the way, tons of economists support. I'm not one of them, but just so you know. I can send you the website if you want, but it makes labor seem artificially scarce. No, so what do the economists that also agree with that say that, I still think the minimum wage should go? Well, they believe that the elasticity is low, so that those who get a raise, that way outweighs to them the fact that some will not be able to find a job. Okay, so if we make labor artificially scarce by mandating a higher wage, then what happens? Well, in some employers, all economists agree on this, they would have hired N people will hire less than N people, right? Economists disagree on how much less than N, and therefore then they disagree on whether it's a good policy or not. Okay, but they all agree that if you make something more expensive, there'll be less of it consumed than there otherwise would be. So that's a powerful signal because the employers buy less labor and they buy labor-saving substitutes as a result of that signal going up, not because of any actual scarcity of labor, but because the government sets a price floor on the price of labor. Okay, so again, so I'm not making a comment about that policy, I'm just saying that it is an artificial increase because it's not by the market, it's by mandate. Okay, so it's scarcity that's created, and this is going on. Some will get a raise, some will not be able to find a job. A lot more will get a raise than will, so yes, or somebody says no, too many people will lose it. So again, intelligent people, including economists, disagree on whether it's a good policy. Okay, but the price signal always takes its toll in a predictable way, whether it's a correct signal actually reflecting changes in scarcity or a contrived signal created by legislation for better or for worse that says, no, the market signal is not okay. It needs to be higher or lower than it actually is. Okay, the price signals are a way that we consumers communicate with sellers and potential sellers. And consumers are also part of the communication process, because if you're a marginal consumer and the price changes, you either buy more or you buy less. Okay, a marginal consumer is one who's just barely in the market at the current price. Someone just barely on the wants will be satisfied part of the demand line, or on the wants will not be satisfied lower half of the demand line. Okay, if the price changes, no one's forcing you to not buy the good or to buy more of it. You choose to, because things have changed, and you evaluate your new choices and you make a change in the choice that you make. Okay, and speculation is, as we just discussed, is an attempt to profit to the benefit of all when they predict accurately from differences in scarcity that arise over time. And then our prediction market is a way that we can harness the awesome power to evoke information from decentralized sources into a single price, a single number called a price. Okay, now I'd love to spend the last 7 minutes on good quality Q&A, which is to me almost any Q&A, but I can move on to the next chapter too if you'd prefer that allocation of the time. Yes? Price signals? The prices that you see around you all the time. Those are signals wrapped up in an incentive. Okay, so the price isn't just, I'm going to have to pay for something. It's signaling to you what the relative cost, or depending if you're a seller or something, the relative value of your time and resources is in different uses. Okay, so a signal is the fact, price signals arise from the fact that prices are easily observed. The price of something signals to you, ultimately given your abilities and your tastes and preferences, what you should and should not do. And the example that I gave for myself, if you might remember that from maybe a week or two ago, my opportunity cost might be doing something like stonemasonry, because I kind of clown around with that a little bit in my time when I don't feel like doing economic stuff. Okay? So that's my next best use of my time. The signal to me is that given my efficiency at doing that kind of work and the price per unit of it in the marketplace, is I don't give up a whole lot to do this instead of that, except for a hobby. Okay? I have a low opportunity cost. Okay? The prices system is signaling to me, be an economist, earn your living that way rather than as a stonemason. Or you go down to the grocery store, it's a good, you led into something good to discuss. Appreciate the thumbs up there. You go down to the grocery store, the price system is signaling to you different ways of meeting your need for food. See, but there's different ways to meet that, right? There's a ton of stuff in that grocery store that you've never purchased and probably never will. Somebody must be, right? But if the price is cheap enough, you say, I've never had that stuff before. Bargain today. They're practically, I'm going to try it. See, whereas otherwise you might not have. And think about that if you're the new producer of something. You better use the price system and maybe even lose money on your product for a while if you expect anybody to ever try it. You're selling the generic brand next to the brand that everybody knows, like a household name. You think somebody's going to buy your product if it's the same price as the one that they are familiar with and heard of? No chance. Maybe just by sheer luck. An immigrant, that has never heard of Bayer, aspirin, right, versus generic. They don't know the difference because they didn't grow up here. But everybody else, KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken versus no name, nothing fried chicken, same price. What are they going to do? Yeah, probably buy the KFC. So you better sell cheap for a while to get people to try your product. Give them an incentive to do that. See, that's that signal wrapped up in as an incentive. And then if you can't get the numbers to come up, okay, some people are trying it, and now you can charge a little bit more and actually make some money, and they won't stick with your product after that, then the economy, the price system is telling you, goodbye. right? Okay, you got past the early period when you're probably going to lose money because you have to sell cheap to get people to try your product. Now if you can't sell it at a profitable price, okay, and think about this term, normal profit. What does that mean? A normal rate of return on resources. If you can't make that, it means you're going to do something else. Okay, so it's normal to have money left over after expenses, a certain amount. If you're doing a lot better than that, let's say it's 10%, just for a number. If you're making a lot more than 10% left over from your after expenses, others will notice. The price system will signal to them to enter that market. Wow, people are making a lot of money selling widgets. You're saying, what's a widget? Never mind, it's a generic, nothing good. Okay. Concrete. I can make concrete. The price system signals you to go in there if you're one of those marginal producers. See, everything's going on at the margin. The marginal producer in a given activity is somebody who's ready and willing to do something else if only the something else becomes more attractive compared to what they're doing. Okay, and so the marginal producer drives this. See, that's why a lot of people don't understand the economics, is they say, hey, I'd be doing X no matter what. The price system, I'd still do the same thing. I love it, or that's the only thing that I know. Okay, well, yeah, the vast majority of people doing anything, that's probably true for them. But there always are people at the margin ready, based on profitability and other possibly intangible aspects, how attractive a job is, how much fun it is, those things. If that gets more attractive or less fun, and some people will switch to other things. You know, maybe somebody's a park ranger, even though they can make more money doing other things, but they love being in the outdoors. But then the policies change and it becomes more of a drag, more paperwork, less time in the outdoors. As a park ranger say, you know, a park ranger sounded pretty good when I thought I'd be on the edge of the Grand Canyon all the time talking to people and explaining what a neat place it is. But now I spend all my time in this office doing paperwork, and I don't ever get out to talk to real people or even to see the scenery. And so it's no longer worth it to me to be a park ranger. I can do something else and make more money with the same skills. And so then they switch. And then the park ranger is 60 years old and about to retire, says, yeah, it's gotten to be a drag, but no, it's too late to start over. I'll just stick to this until I retire. See, so the vast majority are going to stick to whatever, no matter what. See, I milked a couple minutes out of that. Got a couple more minutes. Remember, you'll be thinking about this a week from now and said, I had a couple more minutes to ask a question, and here I am looking at question 47. I have no idea. I have 25 to 20% chance of guessing this right. Wow, I wish I'd asked a question back then on this. I'm getting better at anticipating the questions because I've been doing this for 30 years, but still better. For me to have to guess the question than actually be told it is better. Begging, pleading, fishing, hoping, begging. I already said that, didn't I? No time to go to the next PowerPoint, but we'll do chapter 8 first thing next time, unless we do a top hat question or two that I'll try to think of for this last chapter. But the test, only chapter 5 through 7. They say come 20 minutes ahead of time. I think that's because of how many of you there are to process you in, check your ID and everything. So do show up at 8:10 over at MS 104 next Thursday, not Tuesday. Tuesday, regular class here, chapter 8. Yes? 5, 6, and 7. You didn't know that CH meant chapter. The price of abbreviation. Good that you asked. Yes, 5, 6, and 7.